So, good afternoon, greeting, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Dr. Kayla Naka Francis. I'm one of the editors of the International Journal of Carnival Arts. The IJCA aims to provide clear, invigorating, and comprehensible accounts of early and contemporary research in steel pan, calypso, carnival, and all the carnival arts, from both academics, practitioners, and so on. This is I'm one of the editors of the International Journal of Carnival Arts. The IJCA aims to provide clear, invigorating, and comprehensible accounts of early and contemporary research in steel carnival, and all the carnival arts, from both academics. This is we're about to get some feedback, and I do apologize. One thing I did not anticipate. Right. 3, 4. Do apologize. So yes, the IJCA, we look at carnival arts. And what we've noticed that even though there's a lot of scholarship and talk around steel pan, there's a lot of scholarship and talk around mass, there isn't that much traction with Calypso in the wider diaspora community. And so we wanted to launch a series of talks looking at Calypso and its impact in our quote unquote Calypso diaspora. So we thought this is an appropriate time to embark on a project like this. It's the 100th anniversary of the commercial Calypso tent in Trinidad and Tobago. And we thought, why not then, in commemoration of that, in commemoration of Calypso's long history, to look at its impact globally. So today's webinar is Calypso Migration, Trinidad and Tobago and the Eastern Caribbean meets its diaspora. Serves as an introduction to the entire series. Here with me is a panel of researchers and practitioners who will share some insights about the impact of Calypso and Calypsonians in London, Toronto, and New York. To go along with the program itself, let me introduce Professor Harun Shah, who has led a dual career in science and carnival arts. He's currently based at Middlesex University, London, where he's a member of Nostalgia Steel Band, organizes a biennial carnival arts conference, and has served as board of director of Notting Hill Carnival Limited since 2018. And I'd like to add, he is the founder of the journal. So this is all an extension of his brainchild. With him is Alex the Great Lowenthal. Based in London, he's a veteran Calypsonian who teaches art music at all levels, lecturing on Calypso at several universities and running Calypso and poetry workshops in schools, colleges, and a variety of social learning platforms. He was UK Calypso Monarch in 2010 and 2011 and runs his own record label. Both Professor Shah and Alex the Great will be sharing their experiences of Calypso in London. Following them is Henry Gomez, aka King Cosmos, who's an actor, radio show host, founding member and first chair of the Organization of Calypso Performing Artists, and Caribana Children's Carnival Band leader. King Cosmos will tell us about his experiences of Calypso in Toronto. Following his presentation is Megan Sylvester, who is a music sociologist, author, researcher, focusing on music, gender, and national identity in Calypso and soca. And also music of diasporic carnivals, narratives of resistance in Calypso and raga soca music, steel pan, kaiso jazz, musical identities. She's here to inform us of the Calypso's impact in New York. And she would be followed by Brother Resistance, Mr. Lutalo Masimbo, a veteran Rapso artist, president of the Trinbago Unified Calypsonian Organization, who has traveled extensively as a working musician, taking Trinbago culture to the world, and he would share with us his experiences as a musician in the diaspora, seeing his music hit people firsthand. Thank you all for joining us. So first up, let's go straight to Dr. Shah's presentation.
Take a 3-hour. As he captures the festival with brevity, yet details it in the very way that Calypso's ended. We did not have TV at that time, but Pate News captured the news in cinemas across Trinidad, and from our point of view, it brought steel band and Calypso to the world stage. Itchy was already in London 3 years earlier and helped facilitate task force trade. It sent shockwaves back home in Trinidad, according to our local encyclopedia, and suddenly people saw the potential of what they were doing in a much bigger way. We hear repeatedly during Windrush Week, London is the place for it. This is one of the many myths that we need to dispel. If you want to know more, listen instead to Lord Melody's London Town, which paints a more realistic picture of life in Britain under this period. London is not the place for me. The medium went into a frenzy about the tens of thousands of black immigrants settling in their country, when in fact the numbers were relatively small. And we shouldn't forget that West Indians is invited by Britain to help rebuild our entire country. Nevertheless, in allowed the far right to launch their Keep Britain White campaign, which led to race riots throughout the country. Shop windows displayed signs of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. So how did the Windrush generation respond? Look at this photo of a gathering. What you see are well-dressed, dignified, law-abiding, and hard-working people. I looked at this with a hand lens, and everyone was wearing a tie. But their exemplary behavior and neutral stance did nothing to quell the hostility and aggression of the far right, and eventually youths began to respond. But there's a limit to what society would bear. And just like George Floyd's death in 220, the death of the young Kelso Cochrane in 1959 raised the stakes and galvanized the Caribbean community to respond. I will come back to this later on. So what was the West Indies community like at this time? Sparrow tells this very clearly. No federation, so no interaction. We did not know each other, so how could we jointly face the barrage of racist attacks? In my view, it was through cricket that we became united and understood each other better. Lord's is the home of cricket, and everybody went there. But when we traveled to different grounds, we got to know each other better, sharing food and especially makeshift percussion. West Indies began playing England in 1928. Could 1950, when we had the number in London, be the year we beat the mother country? Or was it just fantasy? Lord's is the home of cricket, and everybody went there. There were 6 grounds that matches were played on. I highlighted Headingley in red in Yorkshire, simply because there was always a daunting prospect going there. These guys were bad. We used to joke and say, how did they learn to behave like us? We had all sorts of missiles fired at us when we were leaving, but have no fear, we responded likewise. I recall once us taking off the hubcaps from car wheels and using these like frisbees. Simply because nothing was ever sweeter than the victory parade in 1950. Hey, Keller.
Yeah.
It's not echoing, and none of the music is coming across at all.
Yardley wasn't broken-hearted when the second inning started. Jenkins was like a target, getting the first 5 into his basket. But Gomez broke him down, while Walcott licked them around. He was not out for 168, leaving Yardley to contemplate. The bowling was super fine.
But what do immigrants do when they feel elated and so proud? You begin to miss your culture more and turn towards your homeland for relief. And we hear the lament of the mighty terror crying out for mass in Great Britain. And where would that come from? Serendipity. No mass here in Great Britain. In a nutshell, she was seeking parity for the black population in the US, and so serious was this crime, she was treated abysmally, being imprisoned before being deported, but not to Trinidad. Trinidad won't have her, but to the UK, where they felt she would just fade away. Far from it, Claudia Jones took on the race riots with fierce opposition, and a long story, it ended with using carnival as an antidote, and more importantly, culture as a medium to confront it. She proclaimed, "A people's art is the genesis of their freedom." Her indoor carnivals lasted until 1963, when she passed away. Here is the mighty Terror crying out for that carnival in Britain.
I really missing the carnival because I adore that festival. The Terror is really missing the carnival because I really love that festival. I can't hear no beating of steel band. I can't see no clown, no wild Indian. Yes, I'll just cry when the time comes. No mass here in Great Britain.
The mighty Terror not only got his carnival, but he was crowned the Calypso King of Great Britain here at St. Pancras Town Hall. 2 years later on, this would move to the streets of Notting Hill, here led by the legendary Russell Henderson. And from that lonely voice of the mighty Terror, crying out in 1954, today Notting Hill Carnival boasts a crowd of 2 million and a landmark in the history of Great Britain. But let's make no bones about it. This was delivered to us by the hard and persistent work of our enduring Calypsonians. Among them, the 3 towering warriors, Lord Kitchener, Lord Beginner, and the mighty Terror. God bless them for it, for leaving us such a memorable legacy for us to pass on to the next generation. Keller?
I apologize for those of you on YouTube for the volume, working out some kinks as we speak. Thank you so much, Haroon, and for the interest of time, and hopefully if we do have time, we will show that video again as I'm working out the kinks. So I want to go straight to Alex for him to share his observations.
Okay, thank you. Which order do you have mine in? Any particular order?
No, you as you call it.
Let's start with beginner because Haroon just was talking about beginner, and beginner has a song called General Election where he talks. If we play a little bit of General Election, please.
Okay.
Very quiet.
I'm having I know what I think I
General election we had in Great Britain caused a sensation, independent, also liberal. It was essential, socialist was glad, communist was sad, conservatives did cheer at the results in Trafalgar Square. But I was confused, waiting to get the news. Me and Dorothy in the rain and the cold by Piccadilly. 2 long days there was announced in the parties. With those majorities, they said that the king was listening. So nothing was missing, traffic could not pass. Police had a task, it was the best election, I'll say. Crowds were there till the break of day. But I was confused, waiting to get the news. Me and Dorothy in the rain and the cold by Piccadilly.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, yes, so Beginner's talking about the general election in 1951 when Clement Attlee took over from Winston Churchill. Well, Winston Churchill obviously had been the Prime Minister during the Second World War, and people wanted to change. But for me, it's interesting because not only is he doing what Calypso does best, which is always commenting on what is happening in the world, both not only generally but also politically. And he, even in that first verse, he talks about the socialists were pleased that the communists weren't, and he talks about the conservatives as well. So he's putting all the different parties into the first verse. And but he and Dorothy are standing on the brain and they cold in Piccadilly. So you get this picture of London in 1951, which of course people back home who hadn't been there wouldn't realise that he's standing there in the rain and the cold. And it's less than 3 minutes long, this song, but it's such a wonderful sound picture of life in London at that time, what was going. He even mentions the king. The king wanted to know what was going on. That would have been King George VI, the current Queen's father. So again, he is. I don't think, to some extent, that the great British public had yet got used to the idea of how descriptive Calypsonians can be. And also he's using the minor chord sequence that is used in Santi Manite, but the tune is different from the usual Santi Manite tune. So he's using the same chords but putting a different melody to it, all of which make it a very memorable song for me. Can we move on to My Landlady? Now, Kitchener sings My Landlady, and when you think of the fact that he sang London is the Place for Me on the gangplank of the Empire Windrush ship, and it's a very positive song, almost what we call rose-tinted spectacle song about London being such a wonderful place, and people, treat you like a millionaire, and you can go for a walk and everything. This is it, My Landlady. Let's hear it.
My landlady's too rude, in my affair she likes to intrude. My landlady's too rude, in my affair she likes to intrude. 5 o'clock in the morning, the landlady is peeping. No, it isn't fair, this persecution I got to bear. And every Monday,
Mr. Give me my rent.
all that I try I cannot prevent, she telling me,
Mr. Give me my rent.
this is how she start, a lot of restrictions to break your heart. After 10 o'clock, tenants must know my front door is locked. And on the wall she stick up a notice, no lady friends, not even a princess. And if you disagree, out you go immediately. And every Monday,
Mr. Give me my rent.
poor Kitchener, I ain't got a cent, she telling me,
Mr. Give me my rent.
no chair, no table, the convenience is terrible.
Beautiful. He's describing the experiences of people trying to find accommodation. And I was born in Belmont, but my parents left to go to Britain when I was 3 years old. So we lived in one room in a house owned by an Irish couple where there were 6 rooms let out to 6 families. A couple of West Indian families, a couple of Irish families, and I think a couple of Indian families too. So, and the rent was quite ridiculously extortionate, which is what Kitchener's talking about. So, and in the last verse, he even says, that landlady bad, she even worse than the landlords in Trinidad, which is quite funny. He's making a joke about it, but he's got to get his little joke in. But it was a very accurate picture of how West Indians were treated in general, except for the other there were signs, for those of you who don't know, there were signs in many people's windows saying no Irish, no blacks, and no dogs. So the Irish were also put upon, and it made them, to a certain extent, there was quite a lot, there was camaraderie between both West Indians and Irish people who tended to unite, if you like, against these landlords, if you like, who were ready to extort money for very poor circumstances in these places. So thirdly, and this is a personal favorite, I heard this song when I was about 8 years old, I think, maybe 8 or 9, which is the wonderful Carnival Boycott by the Mighty Sparrow. And Sparrow did visit Britain in the 50s a couple of times, but he didn't settle down there for any length of time the way Kitchener and Beginner did. And yeah, let's hear it. We'll talk about it after. Let's hear it.
As usual, because I love carnival. Sparrow playing mass as usual, because I love carnival. But no competition for me in San Fernando or the city. They could preach Peter or Paul. I wouldn't even go to Savannah to see football. I intend to keep all my costumes on the shelf. Let them keep the prize in Savannah for their own self. And let the Queen run the show without steel band and Calypso. Who want to go could go up there, but me ain't going nowhere. What really caused the upset is the car the Queen does get. She does nothing for carnival, she only pretty and that is all. But men like me and you, saving money to play history and juju, all we getting is 2 cases of beer and a talk up as man of the year. So I intend to keep all my costumes on the shelf. Let them keep the prize in Savannah for their own self. And let the Queen run the show without steel band and Sparrow. Who want to go could go up there, but we ain't going nowhere.
Yes, you can hear the frustration in the 18-year-old Sparrow's voice. He's venting his spleen, and it was such an exciting record for me. It was brought over. I had relatives who came over to study nursing, 3 of my aunts and 4 of my cousins at various times in London from the mid-50s until the mid-60s, really. And somebody brought that album, Calypso Madness, with them. And I was absolutely captivated by that song. And of course, what he was complaining about was the fact that when he won Monarch with Gene and Dinah in 1956, his prize money was $40 TT. But the Carnival Queen got $5,000 and a car. So he said, she does nothing for Carnival, she only pretty and that is all. And I was quite knocked out by this thing. I thought, how rude to say this about the Queen, because I thought he was talking about the Queen of England, not realizing it was the Carnival Queen. I was a young 8 or 9-year-old boy. And in fact, it had a huge impact upon me, because I subsequently became, to all intents and purposes, a protest singer, albeit doing Calypso. So it was just a wonderful record. It also made Calypso such a strident form of letting people know what was wrong with the world. No other music, except perhaps the blues, took people to task in the same way as Calypso did, and that record really nailed it for me. So that is Sparrow's contribution to, this wonderful art form, where we do not, if you like, we don't hold back on what we say. And even to this day, certainly I remember in the 90s and the early 2000s, whenever I was in Trinidad for Carnival, I would open a newspaper a couple of weeks before Carnival came, and the front page would be about what some Calypsonian had sung about some politician, how the politician was upset. And I thought, what a country where what a Calypsonian sings about can make front page news on a newspaper. It's really great. So thank you very much for listening. That's my contribution to Calypso as it affected us in London.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go on now to Henry Gomez, and he will be presenting on the impact of Calypso in Toronto. So take it away, Henry. Don't forget to unmute.
Yes. Thank you, Kayla. Oh man, I'm so excited to be part of this webinar today. It's pretty much impossible to talk about a Calypso in Canada without talking about Caribana. And since that resonates around the world, so I'm going to begin with a song by Mighty Sparrow. I think it's called Toronto Mass. So I'd like you to play that one before I say anything more. And while you're queuing it, okay, go ahead.
Every year Toronto putting on a big show, carnival they call Caribana. Keeping to a sweet tune, sweating in their costume, playing their mass in Canada. See them out there jumping up and down, fighting to do eating, shaking up their booty out of time, chipping with an awkward swing. I tell you they wild, Toronto gone wild, playing mass Trinidadian style, steel bandy, music sweet, and all the white man boogie in the street. Oh, la, hey, hey.
This is Caribbean Vibes.
See them out there bumping, thicker than a dumpling, woman in the place like Lanty Beach, talking like Barbadian, talking like Jamaican, telling you they're from the West Indies. A little bit of sunshine, get them red, so they're staggering in the band. And when the liquor fly up in their head, they're tackling any man. I tell you, wild, Toronto gone wild, yeah, wild, Trinidadian style, steel bandy, love the music sweet, all that white man boogie in the street. Hey, hey, hey.
Thanks, Kayla. Thank you. Toronto Mass, the Mighty Sparrow. And I think it's fair to say that when Caribana hit Toronto, it's as if a cultural bomb exploded in the city. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't Calypso happening in Toronto and other parts of Canada, especially Montreal, before 1967. But 1967, it seems as if one can set that as a major marker in terms of Carnival, Steel Band, and Calypso in Canada. Now, the beginnings of Carnival, Calypso here, was unlike that of London and New York because it came out of a different need. Caribana started because of a celebration, Canada's 100th anniversary in 1967. So there was this sense of joy, even though Torontonians didn't really know what to expect. But this sense of celebration, this sense of joy that allowed West Indians in Toronto to participate in the 100th anniversary celebration. Whereas you had the angst and the trauma of Notting Hill Carnival, as Haroon alluded to earlier on, we did not have that in Toronto. Whereas you had challenges and so on, the whole racial situation in New York and the United States coming out of the civil rights movements of the 1960s and so on. You didn't quite have that in Toronto. It doesn't mean that there were not tensions here, but this sense of jubilation, this sense of West Indians wanting to be recognized, because there were quite a few West Indians here at the time, even though most of them were primarily university students, domestics, and well, we can't really count the seasonal workers because they were mainly confined. So you have had all these West Indians with this desire to be recognized in a big way, to be recognized by the mainstream. And I think Sparrow captures that beautifully. Now, the hook at the end of the chorus, and all them white women boomby in the street or boomsy in the street or jumping in the street or however you want to put it. And I think that too captures the impact that Caribana and Calypso carnival music had on especially the white Torontonians, who until, it said until 1967 and the years after, they usually left the city during the summertime. They went away to the cottages and so on. So Toronto was, you know, during the summer, it was pretty much deserted. And Caribana, Steel Band, Calypso, Mass helped to change all that. Now, there are other calypsos about Caribana as well. For instance, we have Canadian calypsonians like Jason, John Perez, Rajiman, Roger Gibbs, and we have Crazy, who is of course Trinidadian. They all wrote and sang calypsos about Caribana, capturing the spirit of Caribana. And this sense of exuberance, this sense of major participation. Now, it's also impossible to talk about Calypso in Canada without thinking again of the Eastern Caribbean and the migratory patterns that occurred prior to the 60s and during the 60s as well. And I should have had some of this group's music queued up, but I didn't do that, and is now I'm realizing I should have done that. And I've got to mention the Trade Winds, because this group was led by Dave Martins, who was from Guyana. I think it was still called British Guyana at the time. And in the earlies, the Calypso, individual Calypsonians were not so much the stars of Calypso as the bands were. And Trade Winds, I think, arguably is the most successful band, Calypso Caribbean music band, to come out of Canada. They were based here in Toronto. The band was made up of musicians from Trinidad. I believe Joe Brown, one of the founders of Caribana, one of the originals, was also a member of Trade Winds. And so we had Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago. I think an Antiguan was in that band as well. So this sense of the Eastern Caribbean, and I include Guyana in this sense, even though from time to time there's debate as to whether Guyana is really part of the Caribbean, but we know that it's there on the north coast of South America. So the bands had a bigger influence on Calypso during the 60s and during the 60s, the early 70s. And I think it's fair to say that it's later on, after we had the first Calypso competition here in, well, let me go back on that a bit. I got to be careful with the dates. So instead of saying the first, I would say until we had a major Calypso competition here in Toronto in 1981. That's when the individual Calypsonians really began to be recognized and take off and get a name for themselves. We had, for instance, John Perez, one of his songs, Mash It Up. I wonder, Kayla, I might be putting you on the spot a bit, but if you could pull that up for me, it would be great. While I'm talking, it's Mash It Up by Jason Perez. I believe it's on YouTube. And I think it's fair to say that that's one of the biggest songs that came out of Canada. He had, I think that was in the late 80s, 90s, Mash It Up and Angela. Those were two of the big songs, I believe. They were arranged by Leston Paul. And those were two of the big songs that came out of Canada at the time. Of course, the Tradewinds had songs like Honeymoon Couple, which became a smash hit in the Caribbean and certainly in Toronto and other parts of Canada. Now, I want to leave Caribana, 1967, and move backwards in time a bit. And I want to go to let's say late 1950s until about 1964, when there was a group by the name of CANEWA, that is the Canadian Negro Women's Association. They produced a show called Calypso Carnival. And even though these women, who at the time was led by Kay Livingstone, even though these women were not of Caribbean background, they were very conscious of the Calypso culture. And again, their event was called Calypso Carnival. And they produced these carnival events as a means of raising funds and so on to assist university students, especially Black university students. So as a precursor to Caribana and the explosion of Calypso in Canada, you had a group like CANEWA that was doing a lot of this work. We also had a number of clubs. The well-known activist, lawyer, artist, Calypsonian band leader, Charlie Roach also operated a club here at which Calypso was performed on a regular basis. We had quite a few clubs here in Toronto producing Calypso music. And very quickly, I've got to go to Montreal and Lord Caressa. And could you please play that clip for me, Kayla? Love, Love Alone.
Mm-hmm.
And while she's queuing that up, Lord Caressa, whose real name was Rufus Callender, exploded on the scene in Montreal and rest of Canada and the Caribbean and Australia and New Zealand as well by way of radio. And some of you may know, may be familiar, have heard about his big breakout song in 1937, Love, Love Alone. And I mentioned that because you've got it? Okay, let's hear it, Kayla. Thanks.
It's love alone that caused King Edward to leave the throne.
It's love, love alone that caused King Edward to leave the throne.
We know Edward is noble and great, but love caused him to abdicate.
It's love, love alone that caused King Edward to leave the throne.
Oh, what a sad disappointment was endured by the British government.
It's love, love alone that caused King Edward to leave the throne.
On the 10th of December we heard a talk that he gave the throne to the Duke of York.
It's love, love alone that caused King Edward to leave the throne.
I'm sorry, my mother.
Yes, I thought it necessary to put that in because Montreal was alive and kicking with Calypso in a much bigger way than Toronto, before Toronto became alive. And Lord Caressa was, I mean, he was huge. He had his own show on CBC Radio. And that song, even though it came out in 1937, propelled him in a way that he might not have been before. Now, how he arrived in Montreal, why he arrived, we're not sure of that story. But he was a mainstay at Rockhead's Paradise, which is where that picture was taken. And he had a major link with McGill University and the Tambu Bamboo Players and so on. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Kayla gave me a sign just now. Did you, Kayla? Okay. So I'll leave it there for the 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'll stay with Lord Caressa a bit, because out of that group in Montreal, the Tambu Bamboo Players, we had, for instance, David de Castro, who was known as the Bandit, and he was Canada's first Calypso king or Calypso monarch, because in 1969, at the Maple Leaf Gardens, that's when the first Calypso king competition was held in Canada. And David de Castro, who's now deceased, but he went by the name of the Bandit, he became the Calypso king. Then later on, 1980, there was a competition held at Cuddy's Hideaway. And then 81, there was the big competition in which young beginner, who might be Michael Moore, whom I believe was related to Beginner, he became Canada's first official Calypso king. Yours truly, King Cosmos, my own experience, the UPPA, that's the Organization of Calypso Performing Artists, I must give a plug, because if it were not for that organization, Canadian Calypsonians, I believe, would not have the profile that we now have. I know I can say that it's done wonders for me. I was one of the founding members of the organization. So you have Calypsonians like Panman Pat, Bubbling Brown Sugar. We have Macomere Fifi, who was competed in Trinidad over the years. You have Connector, and we have a whole slew of Calypsonians who owe our experiences and our degree of success and recognition to, I would say, Caribana, 1967, and then UPPA over the years, promoting the work of Calypso and keeping the art form alive in Canada. I believe that's my 2 minutes there now. Thank you, Kayla.
And thank you, King Cosmos. And from King Cosmos, and Toronto, we're moving to New York, and where Megan Sylvester will fill us in on some of the impact of Calypso in New York.
Okay. Thank you, Hila. Alrighty. Okay, so I'm now going to share my screen. I'm trying to share my screen, Hila. Remember, you have to give me co-host privileges.
Yes. Sorry about that. Today has been a technically difficult day all the way around. So this,
Indeed.
I think I clicked on the wrong person to that. There we are. There we are.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, but I'm, okay, good. Wonderful. Yes. Okay. So everyone, welcome to this presentation. I am looking at Calypso migration, and I am looking at the New York experience. I want to start off with a little descriptor about Calypso music, because it becomes important to understand why we would even want to interrogate Calypso music. And I advocate that Calypso music is created and performed as an integral part of the annual carnival festivities. This is coming from Carol Boyce Davies, 1985, and the perspective of Davies marries with the viewpoint of Giuseppe Sofo in his 2014 article entitled Carnival, Memory and Identity, in which he makes the linkages between the culture of Trinidad, the event of Carnival, and identity of people. And this becomes an important point to start with, because as we look and we have listened to the other presentations, we see that we're talking about aspects of Carnival and how Calypso is intertwined with Carnival. We spoke about the issue of memory, and of course, nostalgia is linked to that. And of course, the identity. Who are these Calypsonians? And what identity are they reflecting in the various spaces in which they have been involved? And so it becomes important, as I see it, rounding off this discussion about the foreign spaces in which Calypso was dominant, to look at this. And further, we look at Giuseppe Sofo's view that goes on to say that the Carnival of Trinidad is a performative ritual of cultural resistance and awakening. claiming a space and celebrating freedom from any kind of oppression. So we understand what is it that the Calypso and Carnival is all about. The history of this ritual is strictly connected to the process of cultural decolonization and political independence of the Caribbean country from the motherland. It is in Carnival and for Carnival that Trinidadians have successfully fought colonialism to gain their freedom. So as we talk about the lyrics of Carnival, we understand a little bit more about what exactly Calypso is doing and saying about the Carnival tradition. I want to focus here now on known recordings of Calypso music. In a 2013 publication, authors go on to speak about Calypso's foray into the international music arena. And it becomes important to understand that with Calypso, we would have had first recordings, first live performances, first music publishing, and first recordings in terms of films from 1900 to 1950. And then we look now to see what is this link with New York, and that in the 1920s, many recordings were made in New York. So now we're starting to understand the importance of Calypso and this space, New York. Calypsos made within this period were instrumentals by Lovey, George Bailey, and Lionel Belasco. Belasco led string bands, and one of the other presenters spoke about, in fact, about the importance of the Calypso band. So it becomes important to see that that tradition, while similar in Canada, was also taking place in New York. Belasco led string bands, often including his cousin Cyril Monrose on violin and friend Gerald Clark on guitar or quattro. This exposure of Trinidadian musicians to the New York music scene gave credence to this local indigenous music as having worldwide appeal. During the period 1910 to 1920s, recordings of Calypso were made in New York for both the Caribbean and Latin American markets. But by the 1930s, there was a renewed focus on recording Calypso for international markets. And now we're looking at who are these four main Calypsonians I'm going to be focusing on: Attila the Hun, the Roaring Lion, Lord Executor, and the Growling Tiger. And there were other known Calypsonians, of course, but these are the dominant ones that I'm looking at, who began to travel to New York to exploit their careers. So this is just a little synopsis about Attila the Hun, because I felt it was important for people to understand who he was and what he was all about. His name, of course, would have been Raymond Quevedo, and what we understand about him, we see that time period, 1892 to 1962, where he was born and died, but he began singing in 1911. So it becomes important as we chart the years in which these Calypsonians began to perform and what we see taking place. His prominent period would have been the 1930s to the 1940s, and he was one of the pioneers responsible for spreading awareness. Together with the Roaring Lion, he brought Calypso to the United States for the first time in 1934. So we can situate now this link between Calypso and New York. All right, so it becomes important now to move on. This is a pictorial of Attila the Hun. And now we're looking at the Roaring Lion, 1908, 1999. He was a Calypsonian in terms of singer-composer. So we have some Calypsonians who had varying roles in their careers. His 65-year career began in the early 30s. And then we have some of his songs there: Ugly Woman, Marianne, and Nettie Nettie. In particular, If You Want to Be Happy was a #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 on the 18th of May, 1963. It becomes important to chart these dates and to look at the impact of the Calypso art form as we speak about New York. A picture of the Roaring Lion. Now we turn to Lord Executor. His real name was Philip Garcia. And we see some of the songs and the titles of the songs. And we see that his years active would have been a similar period, the 1930s and continuing to the 1940s. And it becomes important. My reply to Houdini: I don't know how young men living, shop closing ordinance, etc. And it gives us a sense of what the content was of the songs by Lord Executor. A picture here of Lord Executor, aka Philip Garcia. And now we turn to the Growling Tiger. This is an interesting little bit of information, because he was a promising boxer who became a bantamweight champion of Trinidad in 1929. Why is this important? This is important because sometimes we think that a Calypsonian starts off as a Calypsonian, and we see that in this particular case, he did not. His period again for being dominant again was the 1930s, 1940s, and even went up to the 1950s. Listed there are some of the songs that were hits. No, important to chart is "Money Is King" in 1935. See a picture there of the growling tiger. So now what are we looking at? By 1939, New York became a regular playground for nightlife, and Calypso was often the music of choice amongst the many very popular musics of the time. So Calypso was popular music. That needs to be reiterated. At that time, blues, jazz, swing were the popular music of the era, and one of the other presenters spoke about this relationship between Calypso and jazz, particularly in New York, Chicago, and New Orleans. So even though this particular presentation is speaking about the impact of Calypso in New York, we understand that there were other spaces within the United States where Calypso became dominant as popular music. For African Americans, blues and jazz were the musical forms of social commentary in the US. And this island music, Calypso, added yet another voice to the musical options on offer. Based on the new audience for this world music, so Calypso now is being considered world music, the content and the lyrics began to reflect the signs and the times of the lifestyles in New York, adhering to the role of Calypso to act as a voice of social commentary. The use of Calypso as a source of social commentary for matters related to New York are seen in the song "The Calypso King of New York" in the 1940 album, and Harlem Seen Through Calypso Eyes. Dovetailing with this change in the content of Calypsos, that is, Calypso speaking about what was happening in Trinidad and Tobago or in the islands, we see it now within the New York space. Calypso starts to talk about what is happening in that space. Some Calypsonians opted to cease performing and recording Calypso and began to dabble in the musical genre of jazz. One such Trinidadian was Sam Manning, who settled in New York in the 1920s and became a successful performer of jazz music in both vaudeville and theater. The lasting impact of this initiative can be seen to have borne fruit, since even today, Sam Manning reissues of his records are highly sought after by jazz collectors. So we see this now within the New York space, this relationship between Calypso and jazz music. This is a photo of Sam Manning. Yes, international acclaim. During the 1930s and 40s, many opportunities opened up for more and more Calypsonians. So we're moving now beyond the four that I mentioned. Yes, Attila the Hun, Lord Executor, Lion, and Tiger, right? For more Calypsonians to perform overseas. But in addition, Trinidad-led bands were also able to expand their playing field and act as backup bands of Trinidadian performers in New York. So when we're talking about Calypso migration and what happened in New York, we see it's not only the Calypsonians who migrated, but members of the backing bands. Gerald Clark led the best-known band for Calypso music there. In 1934, his band backed the Roaring Lion and Attila the Hun on their historic first recording sessions. Clark's band, often called the Caribbean Serenaders, was subsequently selected to accompany most of the Calypsonians who came to New York to record. So we see that important milestone there. We see Wilma Houdini with Gerald Clark's Night Owl, Songs of Trinidad. Then there was the cover of Calypso classics composed and sung by Wilma Houdini. So it becomes important to understand this. Originally recorded by Brunswick in 1931 for export only, here are some of his best songs, superbly sung with a remarkably fine accompanying band. So we see that accolades now were given in New York for this band. Because the records were intended for Trinidad audiences, these songs, like the island dialect itself, have a French, Spanish, and African tinge. Yes. So we see this is just an example of a flyer that was used in those times, where we see Gerald Clark and his Caribbean Serenaders, and we see featuring Calypso and swing. It becomes important if we look on the left-hand side, assisted by Calypso Kid, Calypso dancers. So we see that there was an opportunity for entrepreneurship and money to be made through Calypso during these times where these balls were held. New York was not the only international city that served to create the artistic landscape of Caribbean artists. London, as we know, others would have spoken about that, and we also had that impact in terms of Latin America. All right. So, in conclusion, this presentation focused on historical underpinnings of the Calypso home and abroad, and Calypso through the decades. Now, what I want to do now is I want to stop sharing and I want to actually play a song that really encapsulates and sort of synopsizes Calypso and New York. Now, there are many, many Calypsonians who would have gone and resided in the United States. I want to speak to key designer Styler, a Calypsonian who would have left Trinidad and would have gone to New York. And in 1991, he penned the lyrics of a song. The melody was produced by Ken Professor Fillmore, so bringing that fusion between Calypso and steel pan, and the arrangement was by Frankie McIntosh. And the name of the song is Calypso. So this is a love song to Calypso. So allow me to share, please.
Like a diamond in the night, shining bright. She's alright. Magical. Yes, her charm is so magical. She takes all my blues away any day. She's okay. I want her to be right here every year and fill my heart with music all the way. Your rapture takes me higher, starts my fire. Ooh, baby, just wanna hold her tight day and night. Calypso music feels so good.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to share that song, because I think that it really encapsulates the way in which Calypso can be conceived beyond the way that it was seen in Trinidad and Tobago. And we look at the New York expression of Calypso music as I come to a conclusion of this particular presentation, looking at Calypso migration, the New York experience. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Megan, for a very informative presentation. And I want to turn it over now. So we were in the diaspora. Now we're coming back to Trinidad and Tobago, and I want to welcome Brother Resistance. And I'm going to turn it over to him for him to share his reflections. So go ahead, Brother Resistance.
Right, greetings everyone. You can hear me?
Yes.
Right, so first of all, I want to apologize for my timing. And secondly, I am still unsure as to where to drop my anchor in this presentation. So let me explain that. First of all, I was told that I had to do, that I should do overall presentation to Calypso and migration. So I began to prepare something like that. And then a day or so ago, I saw that I was just doing something about my experience in England, where my work is concerned. So I somewhere in between there, and I would try with the time that I have to make a mix with the both of them, right? Okay, so first of all, and on top of that, I didn't hear what Alexander the Great had to say, so I know not to double up and say something we see already. Will you forgive me, right? Nice. So, in terms of the British experience, I think it's well, a couple of days ago we celebrated the Windrush experience, which commemorates what we know as the Windrush generation, the arrival by Caribbean peoples in a big way on the ship, the Windrush. Now, as we know, coming off of that ship was the late great Grand Master, Lord Kitchener. And of course, the British media run down to the ship and capture Kitchener with his guitar, rendering a song. London is the place for me. And I'm sure Alexander the Great must not play that already. Yeah, London is the place for me, according to the poet Anthony Joseph. Is one of the most iconic photographs of any situation in the context of migration to a country. I tend to agree with him. That's why I mentioned it in the quote, right? So now we're talking about the experience that Calypso arriving in England and already meeting a space where a lot of the musics from the musics of the Caribbean, from Central America, from Africa, etc., engaging and embracing the English quote unquote music and beginning to form a different kind of experience that today we know as music coming out of England, right? Or the British experience, So we're talking about laying that as our foundation, but understanding more than that, because Kitchener's arrival means that somewhere along the line he would meet, or he would embrace Russell Henderson as a pianist, composer, arranger, and all these different kind of things. And somewhere along the line, the Magic Terror would arrive in London. And somewhere along the line, they would have done situations where they find themselves performing in the various pubs, fitting in with the English culture and so on. And that takes place in an era when, of course, it caused a little consternation in the politics and the culture of the UK. Nevertheless, Calypso is an art form like that. It pushed on, and after pushing on, it pushed out new experiences within the cultural context of the UK. And so we're talking about that as a background, setting it up, so that in terms of, that we need to flow from that into what is known as the Notting Hill Carnival. We wouldn't go into that in no big way. We would expect that would have been dealt with already. But the Notting Hill Carnival and the importance of that carnival as it expanded the Caribbean experience, especially the experience of Trinidad and Tobago on the British scene. Right? So we're coming over here now to say weather resistance arrival in London would have meet a whole cultural experience that was already set, that was already active, that was already explosive, right? And my entry came from the literary gate, but I came to London to visit to be part of the first book fair of Black, Radical, and Third World books. Right, so there I would meet, that was on the invitation of Linton Kwesi Johnson, who, as we know, is a dub poet, and I do in Rhapsody, which is the poetry of Calypso. And therefore I will be connected with the people at Wilton Road, you know, and they would connect me to an opportunity to meet C.L.R. James, who would still talk about Belmont as if he was living there, you know. I would meet John LaRose and his son Michael. I would meet the lady from Buckle Overture Bookshop. And so I began to immerse myself into the British experience. So I would visit the book fair myself and Seiko Tafari, who is another poet. We would visit there for a couple of years well. And always had my sights set on being a performance poet in the British context, because I am looking at the leaders of the movement. Lyndon Kwesi Johnson, he was there recording with Island Records and touring. I would look at Benjamin Zephaniah. I would look at a number of persons. They would bring Mikey Smith from Jamaica. They would bring Mutabaruka from Jamaica, would be passing through, Oku Onura. And I would say to myself, seeing as the dub poetry is dominant, I would have to find a way to let them know that the Rhapsody experience is here and the Rhapsody experience is now. And that was the most exciting time in my life. I would come again in a different situation, in a sense of exile from the Network Band, which is my band, the Network Rhythm Band. And on that occasion, I would come to spend a few months well, you know. So I bounced up with Anis Hadid, Afaman. Anis Hadid, I say, Anis, I let down my bucket here for the time, and I would like to do the musical experience of the Rhapsody. And again, I said, I must produce an album. And Anis take me up like a child. Right? We went to Brent Black Music Studios, which was run by, at that time, by Leslie Palmer, right? Trinidad, Leslie Palmer, who was deep into the music business as well. And in the Brent Black Music Cooperative Studios, we began to cut an album. Anis brought Winston DeLandro, Trinidad. Anis brought Richard Bailey, huge, Trinidad, on the drums. You know, that man when he come we play phase 2, right? And Anis would secure everything, including the chorus singers, and there will be introduced to Geraldine Connor. You know, so I started with big ones early, and we put that album together. As I'm talking here, I don't know if Kayla did find the track Ring the Bell on that Rhapsody Takeover album. If you find it, if you can touch a little bit on it here now, please.
Ring the bell
Yeah, well, the shot of the band you see there, when I come to talk about our major tours, that's the band that would have been traveling with me. Now that album Rhapsody Take Over, I'd like you to hear the difference in, because that's the bell that you know. For the bell in England, like if it was made for the environment and the temperature and thing, a nice bell, you know, but it wasn't carrying the OSHA shots and so on. Because I didn't have my band with me. And yet I had my band with me because that band I was working with in England was known as the Breakfast Band. Everybody didn't know how huge that band was in terms of the British music scene. And I give thanks to all of them for rallying around me as I just come then. You know, the album we produced was called Rhapsody Take Over. And that album was voted by Evening Standard newspaper as the #1 debut album in the British music scene. I give thanks for that. And after that, things started to swing, you know. In doing the album, I began to connect with the music business itself. I must mention that because in Trinidad is different, everything different in Trinidad. You look for somebody who can record you, and all you want is a CD record. In the British scene, I was already experienced in producing the record, doing the artwork for the label, the artwork for the sleeve, packaging and producing and distributing the album. Because in Trinidad, you do everything for yourself. And I went with that attitude of trying to do everything for myself. We need to recognize that each one of these areas was a specific area in the music business, right? I give thanks for learning that too, because I learned a lot of things in England, a lot of things. So coming forward from that album, when I began to circulate in the music aspect of the things, I would meet Smokey Joe. Well, Smokey Joe is a name that is like folklore then, because everybody want to talk about Smokey Joe, and now Smokey Joe. So long they send the record for him and he didn't bring it out yet. And they, when I met Smokey Joe, and swing back into the hardcore Calypso now. After meeting Smokey Joe, and we had a business conversation, he said, what you would like is to get the records on them direct from Trinidad, the Calypso records. And once any one of those recordings look like it could make a difference, he would want to do, he would want to be connected to the artist in order to make a business agreement. It so happened that I think 1985 it was, I came up with Rocket from Merchant, and I came up with a Black Stallion, can't remember what was the track, but the Black Stallion was further away from my jurisdiction. Why I say that? Because Merchant was already part of the Network with Band Experience in Trinidad. We worked together for a number of years. And so when that album came out, it was me and Carrega Mandela who would steer the distribution and sales of that record on the ground. So to get the producer and Smokey to talk wasn't difficult. And that year, when Smokey went to BBC, trying to get the recording for what I call the summer music, the fun music, they select, would you like to rock it with me? The rest is history. Because Merchant went onto the British charts. That would be after Lorraine by Explainer. Merchant went to the British charts. Sorry. Merchant, Rock It With Me, went on to the, what is it called? Top of the Pops. And the Top of the Pops experience, he was selected for a performance in, I think it's Hippodrome Disco, right? And that's a place, well, boy, I'll go with Merchant because I know Merchant will get on by the door and different kind of things. So I buy a little leather jacket, you know, and dress a certain kind of way and talk to myself about a certain kind of conduct. When we reach Hippodrome, the place back up because it was Merchant and Atlantic Star were the two features of the night. The place back up with people. If you see people outside the Hippodrome and police on horseback holding back people, when they see Merchant reach, hello? Well, it was like, I never see it in my life. The Calypso thing is concerned. You know, so when they do a performance, nice, Merchant thing was going good. Smokey tried to carry him down on the lane where they have all the different publishers. Because Merchant's main strength is as a songwriter, you know. But somehow Merchant couldn't take the cold. He said, too cold, I can't stay here. And he disappeared. But as he disappeared, the song come down the chart because they couldn't get him for interviews and things like that. But truly, it was an experience, it was a world experience for me. And then I will touch about a couple of other people I met in the music business who was important. It's like Doggies. Doggies had a venue, and you would get Calypso by Doggies. You look at Sonny Blacks, a huge promoter. But Sonny Blacks would take the music, tour it across England. We do Rose, we do Sparrow, we do Black Stallion, them and Roy Cape, do a number of things and move them out of England and across Europe, you know, and very humble, a very quiet kind of guy. And all the kind of things they say, I tell him we do a show and they didn't have so much people. I was on the show, he put me on the cast. And I see Resistance, but tonight the way all the audience looking here, he ain't sure to get paid. You know. I say that to myself, eh? Don't misunderstand me. And then Smokey called me and said, come. He said, he said, hold this. And that was another shock for me. You know, because in Trinidad, the man that he ain't see you, he ain't know you. Smokey was a man live up to his agreements and that kind of thing. So I must mention Danny Holder and Keith Lacan. Keith Lacan, may he rest in peace, because he left us just a couple of weeks ago. But they did some of the major shows. Short theater with Sconta, Francine, the Mighty Duke, the Resistance, of course. And they would do down in the stadium, I can't remember the name of the stadium, Lamborghini Canada. They do the stadium every year. They had a big Calypso and Soca festival, you know, and because of my connection in Trinidad with the Uprising Culture Shop, when the People's Mall, everybody want who cannot be artists and them for them. So they would have bring explainer, they would have bring Rose all wrong there, Sponta, Crazy, Black Stallion, Shadow, Luigo, you know, they would have bring artists like that. And that festival was had a big impact on not only the carnival scene, because it was prior to carnival, but on the appreciation for the Calypso and Soca music. Right? Following that, there would have been a big tour with the Roaring Lion and the Great Honorable Pretender. That was a historic moment, again, for the Calypso in that era. In terms of regular venues, of course, the Tabernacle was like church on a Sunday. You had to go and you had to pray to the music. You know, that kind of way. Besides Tabernacle, well, of course, there was that short theater. There was Yas Santiwa. Yas Santiwa is important because at one time it was, I don't know if it still is, the headquarters for the Calypso organization, which was, at the time was run by Tiger, you know. So of course I got to meet another the British resident British Calypsonians, Loki and and people like them who are always there in the mix and in the competition and so on. So these are important things. I must mention when Alex, his name was Alex. I can't forget the name, so, but he was the coordinator for event name a year called Caribbean Focus. The Caribbean Focus was the experience where all the musics and the cultural art forms of the Caribbean were on showcase throughout the whole of the UK, you know. It's that experience that caused me to bring on board for their first outer international tour in a tour with them band. And we won by Leicester. In Leicester, we got standing ovation. In Leicester, we do Sheffield, Birmingham, Coventry, we do London, Brent, up in Brent, we did down in the west, the steel bands and them, you know, mash up, no respect. We do other things down there. We do Royal Albert Hall, we do Africa Center. So in one session, we kind of capture the experience in London. And from there, our thing just started to grow. Always Hadid would be there to guide me, to answer a question that I might need some information on. Another guy called Maxwell, who was also important in the experience. And when I settled in London, I opened my store on All Saints Road. It was called the Uprising Culture Shop, which is a replica of the shop I had in Deepest Mall in Port of Spain. And that established me as a connector, administrator, and everything within the music business, especially in relation to Calypso and so on in London. I give thanks for that experience. I don't know how much more time I have, so I think, see?
We're almost running out of.
So I wind up now.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm winding up now. And winding up now, I want to say that there's so much more space for the music to occupy in the British scene. There's so much more space. But it should be more outside of the carnival experience. You know? It's like what Alexander the Great and them Tobago Crusoe and them doing, those like Sunday sessions and things outside of the carnival. We need to get a lot more of that, and we just need to find some way to capture radio outside of the one or two shows that we have and outside of the personal radio stations. And once we do that, we can make a big difference in what's happening in England and in Europe. So when I rested here for the time being, I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to express my musicals. Thank you.
I think the fella you're talking about is Alex Pascal.
Alex Pascal, what do you mean?
Yeah, because I know Alex from long time. Yes.
Alex Pascal.
Alex Pascal, the guy used to do BBC London.
That's right.
On London. Yeah, that was
That's
Alex
right.
Pascal.
Thanks, man.
All those people you mentioned, Geraldine Connor and Russell Henderson. Russell used to come by my uncle's when I was in Trinidad as a baby. I mean, we kept in touch all the way through here. Actually, I must send you. I wrote a song with there's a great panist called Debbie Romaine. She's married now, Debbie Eden. We wrote a song called Russell Henderson, Always the Pan Man, 2 days after he passed in 2015. I have a video of it. Maybe I'll send it. Well, Keller could give me your email or something. But all these people, and Pearl Connor, Geraldine's mother, was at school with my mother. She was at school with my mother. So I used to go to Geraldine when I was a child in England. I remember her from when we were both children. And also Robert John.
Robert John.
John. Yeah, Robert and I, we talk every week probably. You know, so it all goes back, all those connections. Belmont boy. I was born in Belmont, you see.
As we are starting to have the conversation flow, I want to invite everyone on the panel to open up and have discussion about what it means, migration and Calypso, and the significance of it and the importance of it from each diaspora space, and then the reconnections that we make because of this music. So I'm turning it over to the panel, and we have a few more minutes.
Okay.
Arun, go ahead.
Can I pick off quickly, Keller? And that is because the first selection I made wasn't heard, and I wanted to stress this: that 1951, when the Festival of Britain took place, this is a landmark in I think the whole of Carnival, Calypso, Steel Band, Mass for Trinidad. Yes. And you know, the Festival of Britain took place on the South Bank, where Festival Hall is of the Thames is. I heard a recent BBC documentary on the Festival of Britain, and it blew me to pieces that the background to this whole thing was Kitchener's Calypso, Festival of Britain 1951. It was a really complex exhibition. It was showing the future of space, the future of science, the Discovery Dome. And in 4 verses, Kitchener captures that Calypso with amazing precision, just what Calypso could do, that the BBC had to use it. That was shown on the Pathé News in cinemas all around Trinidad. And Cyril Kamai, who is my 90-year-old encyclopedia in London, Cyril says in Trinidad, every pan side steel band person wanted to travel. It changed Trinidad in a big way than we ever anticipated. So I just want to make sure that we highlight 1951 and Kitchener and his important part in kicking us off in Britain that we've just heard from Alex and Brother Resistance today.
And TASPO, Trinidad All Steel Percussion Orchestra, was the first time the English saw pan. I mean, they were so incredulous that when they played, there was 12 of them, if you remember. When they played, the English didn't believe they were playing. They went looking under the pans and said they must be playing a tape recorder. They said they can't be making music from these dustbins. And they checked them out because they couldn't believe what was coming. That was amazing. And the first Festival of Britain was 1851 under Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. So in 1951 they repeated it. And I guess in 2051, they'll do another one.
Well, just a quick note to add to that as well. And really say that one day, hopefully, we'll get Sterling Betancourt onto this panel. Sterling is 92 and still growing strong. And he sings and composes some great calypsos. He even sings to the background of that Festival of Britain documentary as well. Sterling, I mean, I was lucky to be with him for over 30 years. He started Nostalgia and I played with him and still do gigs with him as well. But what Sterling pointed out from that is when TASPO arrived at Buckingham Palace, they put them down to the furthest corner of the grounds where nobody can see them. The Duke heard the steel band and brought them to the entrance of the ground. And then steel band really took over. Wow. And Sterling tells that story over and over. Their tours came, Kitchener was there to support them and support the band as well. So were the Connors that were mentioned earlier, Edric Connor and so on, and Geraldine Connor. All of these people got together and really lift off the whole program here in the UK.
And it seems so fitting that we are talking so much about the steel band, excuse me, steel band, steel pan, TASPO. And as Kayla mentioned in the opening, in the introduction, it is the steel pan, the masquerade that usually gets the attention. And in a sense, understandably so, because the novelty of the steel pan, and I can only imagine 1951. I mean, as Alex mentioned, like that music could be coming from these dustbins, and my reading of the story is that it was a deliberate decision not to prettify the pans, to leave them as they were, and it achieved the impact.
Correct.
Now, here on the Canadian scene, prior to 1967, it was mainly the students at the University of Toronto here in Toronto, and McGill University in Montreal, because then again, it's the students whose parents could afford to, quote unquote, send them abroad, send them away to study. And again, the steel pan, they had the steel pan with them. In Montreal, you had there was a group called the Tambu Bamboo Boys. And the name itself helps to tell a story. And if one were to look at a picture of the members of that group, one would see clearly that they belonged to a certain class. I think one of the group members' name was something Innes. I can't remember his full name right now, but they accompanied Lord Caressa for quite a while, the Tambu Bamboo Boys. Now, here in Toronto, at the University of Toronto, it's the steel band. At the CNE, the Canadian National Exhibition, even before Caribana, we had a steel band. I think it was Esso Tripoli played at the CNE. We did have, so again, it was the steel band that captured people's imagination. They were fascinated. And then later on now, the Calypso, even though when we go back in history, it's the other way around in a sense, because it's the Chantwells and so on who, carried the chants and so on and urged the people on. But I guess this is the way life moves, and we could never pin things down and keep them rigidly in place because the forces move in their own way.
Can I ask the panel members here?
Okay.
One of the questions I wanted to ask, when you heard Alexander talked about My Landlady's Too Rude, you can listen to calypsos like this in London. You can chart the history of traveling on the underground, on what was going on in politics, as he did as well with the election and so on. Mm-hmm. And you could listen to this. You don't need to read a history. C.L.R. James often quoted that. Listen to cricket in what happened in Britain. You hear Calypso, again, that would do the same thing, the Federation. Is it the same for New York and Toronto? Do you
go first, Megan.
Well, I wanted to, before I answer that question, I wanted to just sort of synopsize what you were talking about in terms of the marrying of Calypso and steel pan music, which is why I thought it fitting to use that song to show that linkage with the introduction that I gave about what is Carnival, what is Calypso, and how they come together, and then to end the presentation speaking about that marrying of Calypso and steel pan music. It just really shows the synergy of what Carnival really brings out and what Trinidad culture and identity is all about. So that becomes important to note. And I think it's also important, Brother Resistance mentioned bands. You also mentioned bands. And I think it's significant that we don't lose the importance of the backing band and the role that the band played to accompany the frontline singers who were the Calypsonians or the Rapso performers in this space. I think that's critically important to note. So that is one of the important points I wanted to make sure that we get out there. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
That's a fantastic point, honestly, Megan. I've almost been in trouble in London because we have the most fabulous band. You know the Reese brothers, Felix Reese and his brother. Okay, well, they now play for the Calypso band here when we do our Calypso tent in the summer. And we've got the best band we've ever had. And being a musician, I was a musician for many years before I started going back to my roots. I've always advocated for the band, but without wishing to be disparaging, we had not the greatest bands back in the kind of 90s when Tiger was running things, because there wasn't a lot of money around, and he didn't really, I always said to him, you got to pay more musicians. We got to pay more money for the musicians, because the musicians are the heart of how good or bad we sound. If you haven't got a very good band, you don't sound good. Anyway, we now have a fantastic band. I mean, Haroon would be the first to say the band, since the last 3 years, since Felix has been in charge, it's been absolutely brilliant. And you're absolutely right, Megan. There's only one book, Roy Cape. There's a book by this lady, Gibault.
Right.
Jocelyn Gibault.
Yeah.
Jocelyn's written this book. And I've read the book. It's a great book. But for so long, the musicians have been overlooked by the general public and actually by the Calypso, not Calypsonians themselves, but the Calypso business. It's like, oh yeah, it's all about the Calypsonian. It is about the Calypsonian to a point, but a great band makes a great show, and a not very good band loses the show. And when you think of all of Kitchener's fantastic recordings, that fabulous band from New York, where he used to do his recording, remember? If you think of things like Mystery Band and Rainorama and Bee's Melody, wow. You see that? I could see Henry agreeing.
Yes.
The band, you're only as good as your band, you know. You're only really as good as your band.
I don't think anyone can argue with that. But technology now has made the situation a little more complicated because now people perform to the rhythm tracks, and the economics of the business also has a great impact. Now here in Toronto, there's this, again, the tension, because among the Calypsonians, very often after we have paid the band, we have no money, no kind of honorarium, nothing to present to the Calypsonians. Now, on the other hand, the Calypsonians many of them have to pay for a song, they have to pay to get it arranged, they have to buy so the financial outlay is very significant. So it's really difficult for a Calypsonian to look favorably on the band, even though we know the band is important, but to look favorably. But I want to leave that for a little bit, and I want to ask this question after making this comment. Here in Toronto, we truly reflect the Eastern and Northern Caribbean in the diaspora, in our Calypso tents and so on, St. Vincent, Grenada, St. Lucia, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, you name it. What is it like in New York? What is it like in London? Do you have that same diasporic mix?
You want to go first, Megan?
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I would say we have a very eclectic and mixed group. I'm very pleased about the fact that we have a lot of different islands represented in the London scene. We have St. Vincentians, we have, there's a whole group. We've got people from St. Kitts as well. We have Barbados represented, Grenada, as well as Trinidadians. And I'm very pleased with it because I think we are Caribbeans. I know I'm a Trini, and I know Trinis like to boast, well, everything is Trinidadian. But actually, I disagree with that because I think everything should be Caribbean. And the only thing we've got that we all share is the cricket team. And when we were in our prime, we were the best ever. And that was because it was a Caribbean team rather than an individual island team. And I mean, it's just, my feeling is, embrace everybody and let everybody show. Because hey, listen to someone like Ajamu from Grenada. What a fantastic songwriter! What a wonderful Calypsonian. You know, we got to cherish everybody because everybody has their thing to bring to the table. Megan, please.
Yes, and I completely concur that it is, when we're talking about Calypso, we're talking about responses from the Caribbean space. So when we're talking about diaspora, and when we're talking about what is the contribution? And when we look at the root of Calypso is really music that is coming out of the slavery experience. And we know that, just to speak, Alex, to what you just said, slavery wasn't only in Trinidad. So this boast that Trinidadians have that Calypso is theirs is problematic at best, because when we see that it is a response to a particular set of circumstances, and I think that is important to note. So to answer the question, yes, we have those diasporic links in New York as well. One of the things that I want to touch on is the importance of theater to, and play acting, etc., to the Calypso art form and Rapso, because Brother Resistance mentioned that as, in terms of his entry into the space, and that becomes important to note. But when we look at what's happened in New York later on from what I would have presented, and we look at the movement of Dawad Phillip and the contribution that he would have made to staging Calypso tents, but what would have come before that in New York? This whole aspect of poetry, this whole aspect of theater production, and it's linked to the Calypso art form. So that's important in terms of another synergy that we see in terms of perhaps London and New York. I'm not too sure if there was something similar in Canada.
I take it that you've thrown it to me now, as you mentioned
Yes,
Canada.
yes, I have.
The last word of her sentence was Canada.
Yes, indeed. And I was just playing dead to catch Kobo alive. So you haven't heard that in a long time. Yes, we haven't had theatre here to the extent. Some of the Calypso tent, especially during quote unquote their presentations, especially at competition time, that's usually as close as it gets to Calypso theater. But I believe that there is a space for that, you know, and that's part of the history of Calypso as well, especially in TNT. So I think that there's a space for that. And maybe after this COVID situation is over and things open up, that might be one of the things to emerge. And very quickly, I want to add, when we look at the Caribbean, we've had this inter-island migration anyway, because the Mighty Sparrow, you know, his Grenadian connection, and we have those from St. Vincent. So I think the diaspora truly now, you know, encapsulates that. It captures that in a beautiful way, and I'm happy about it.
Yeah.
I think Megan is sorry, no,
Kayla
is calling on us to wind them down. Is that your plans, Kayla?
Can we have a last word from Brother Resistance?
Yes,
Because
please.
he's in the home country, if it were, or from Keller.
Oh, well, my last word will be scattered all over. But linked to what our discussion was about, we talk about making the links in the country and connecting it back to Trinidad. And just in a short space, as we were talking about Diaspora, one of my greatest moments was to meet people like Ziggy and people like Boots Davidson on that old Saints Road stretch, you know, where they used to have press, you know, press instead of snow cone, they had press, they had fry bake, they had them kind of thing, you know, and make you feel like you're home. But more than that, is in London I met Martin Mice Raymond, who was a producer out there of much significance. And he offered to me for us to work together. Right? He said, don't study money and thing. The music you have, I would like to get an opportunity to position it in the world market. And then Mice came back, we started in London, and then Mice came back to Trinidad. And so I look at things like these, and sometimes like it's God works then, you know, outside of the business and the money changing hands and things, and that spiritual connection, that energy flowing from Trinidad and Tobago and the various other islands into the diaspora and making that connection, and in doing so, moving the world. More than we could talk that here, it's something happening all the time, everywhere.
Kayla, I think we should have a word from you, as Alex said.
Yes. You are the chairperson.
Hey, well, all I can say is that this is the beginning of a very necessary process. All too often, we sit in our isolated bubbles and we are not paying attention to these interconnections, the interweavings that we make from space to space to space. One of the main observations that you find, and Brother Resistance brought this up, it's somehow when we leave the Caribbean and we enter the diaspora space, and we are able then to see our fellow Caribbean brothers and sisters, that we are able to make connections that push us forward. And so in no small way, continuing this series, and to plug the series, look out for more information. We will have more talks like this, focusing on each diaspora space in more depth, as a way of keeping that connection alive, you know, beyond, it is Pan-Africanism in motion, it is Caribbeanism in motion, is something that we need more than ever. Facing a both shrinking and more exclusionary global system. We need these connections. And now I want to turn it back over to Haroon for the vote of thanks. Thank you all for joining us. Back to you, Haroon.
In this last minute, I think it's necessary to start by saying thank you to Caleb, who works so hard behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
She is a university lecturer at UTT, and I have to tell you that she's done all this work outside working hours. And it's no feat to do two jobs like this at the same time. So thanks very much again, Kayla. Thank you to all the speakers, to Alex, to Henry, to Megan, and Brother Resistance. We would have liked to hear a little bit more about what's going on in Trinidad, but London obviously excited you a lot. But hopefully in another meeting that will happen. There is a panel that's been working behind the scenes as well, and that includes Roger Gibbs from Toronto, Andy Roberts from the US, Manuel Monestel from Costa Rica, and lastly, Sonny Bowie from Nigeria. So what Kayla just spoke about this network going more global, we are now going to expand it right into Africa. Hear fantastic music and Calypso coming out from Africa. But something I'll just drop in at this point, because we talked a little bit about Steel Pan tonight. We have a conference in October, and Bowie is coming up as one of the speakers. It might surprise many people to know that Nigeria has over 40 steel bands and a panorama. So the culture is spreading all over the world. I want to say a very special thanks to the people who joined the program as well. I am sure we'll get better, as Kayla says, as the week's gone. Finally, I want to end with one slide that's on your screen. We focused this evening on 3 cities where roughly about the same time, but in response to very different circumstances, as Henry said and others said, Trinidad Carnival was born in the diaspora. And in all cases, it started with a very small number of people, some of whom were mentioned tonight, Russell Henderson, Sterling Betancourt. But when you look at that graph, if you look at the bottom line, this was something I did for the student. You look at the bottom line and you look at those numbers, you would have expected Carnival to be reaching audiences today of maybe 100, 150,000. The actual number is between 1 to 2 million you get in Notting Hill Carnival. And that exponential increase is something that I think we should be really proud of.
Yes.
Because it shows more than anything else that this carnival that was born in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean, and it's not just something that is an ordinary art form. It is something phenomenal to have increased at that sort of level. And we should go back again and thank all of these people for this precious gift of Calypso and Carnival as a whole. Thank you everybody for a really wonderful first meeting. We are looking forward to having many more like these. And I end again by saying thanks to Kayla for doing such a great job in facilitating this. Thanks very much.
Kayla, Haroon, if I may, just remember, play my song, playback time, listen to it very carefully, okay?
Oh,
okay.
I have
well done, Henry. I've listened to it. It's
thanks,
great.
Alex. Haroon, you got to play it, okay?
I have your CD, don't forget it. I've been playing it only today.
Oh, it's you I gave it to. Oh, share it with Alex for me, okay?
I will do that.
Okay, yes,
okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay, safe journey, everybody. Good night.
Okay,
everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.
And as we leave, I just want to leave us with, we can play this as our outro. And thank you all for your participation. It was a lovely evening and just a musical expression of what we are doing here.
Alrighty.
Hear a cry. Some say it's strange. I can't see why. 'Cause all I know is when I hear it moves me so, and I feel a spirit, and
one
Great
thing
choice.
everything must change. So now that it's changed, why are they acting strange? Tell my people, take my calypso music to the mountain. Let every drop of the hair wet, I say. Out of them barrack yard, calypso rising. Shaking off that old time style, putting on a brand new style, rising up from the ghetto of the world stagnation, reaching out for tomorrow with a world vibration. Calypso, heading for stardom and wait, because this is world music. This song was
Thank you all.
Ready?
Good evening. Enjoy the rest of your night, afternoon,
Thank you.
whatever time
Yes.
you are. We'll see you again.
See you again. Thanks a
Bye.
lot.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.